The overall top is finished, so we're going to start on the pants, and I'm doing the back with the darts to start out with. So you're going to remove your pattern, and the darts are each sewn individually, so I have my markings here. I'm going to fold on the fold line, right sides together, and I'm going to pin where the dot is at the top of the dart. And if your markings are accurate, it should, when you put the pin through, it should be through the dot at the other side. And then I'm also going to put a pin at the bottom of the dart, just on the fold line. Now to sew this, I'm going to start at the wide end and sew towards the narrow end. So regular foot, I'm starting out with regular stitch length, so 2.5 or 2.6. And I'm going to start right on the line at the edge of the fabric and backstitch. And I'm going to sew 2/3 down the dart. And then I'm going to shorten my stitch length to 1.5, and I'm going to sew towards the point. And this is because we're not going to backstitch at the point. If we backstitch there, it adds more bulk and it causes a pucker at the bottom of the dart, and we want it to be as smooth as possible. So I'm sewing towards the point, and when I get to the point, my last 2 or 3 stitches are parallel to the fold, right on the fold. And then essentially I sew off for 1 or 2 stitches. And then when you pull your thread away, you're going to cut, leaving long threads here, because we are going to knot this. And to knot it, I'm going to put a pin right at the point where my thread is. And I'm going to loop around the pin. Through the loop. And what the pin's going to do is it's going to help that knot be right at the point. They tend to want to tie further away. So then my knot's right at the point, and you only need to do 1 knot and then trim your threads and both ends. So that's what that looks like when you've sewn it. So you're going to do the same for the other dart. Now we're going to press the darts. So first you're going to press it as it was sewn, but don't press below the tip of the dart. So you're just pressing up to that dot at the point, which will disappear as we're pressing. So I'm going to do both of those. Then darts are almost always pressed towards the center of the body. So on this particular piece, the center is this curved seam here, which is the crotch seam. Now I'm going to show you 2 ways to press these. So this one I'm going to press just using the tip of the iron. So the dart's folded towards the center, and I am just using the tip of the iron to the tip of the dart. If I go below that, I'm going to press some wrinkles into the fabric. So I only want to go to the bottom of the dart. Now, because this is a bear and he's got a little bit of funny shaping, the right side has a little tiny bit of pucker there, but that's pretty good. And then press it from the right side. And again, I'm being very careful, and you'll notice I'm lifting on the fabric, because if I didn't do that and I press this, I'd get these funny rounded wrinkles in this area. So that's the first dart. Now the second dart, you can use a tailor's ham to press it, so then I don't have to lift the fabric as I'm pressing. So again, pressing towards the curved seam, and what I want to do is find a curve on the ham that fits the curve on the dart. So right about there is good. And again, pressing towards the center. And now I can press below the tip of the dart because the ham is mimicking the curves on the body. And then you can turn it over and press from the right side. And you can see you got a beautiful smooth curve there on the end of the dart. What you don't want is a bubble or a pucker at the bottom of the dart. So our darts are finished, and now we're going to start sewing the pants together. So these are the backs, and we're going to be sewing the fronts and backs together. So I'm taking my pattern off here. And we're going to sew it together at what is called the inseam. So the inseam is this inside seam next to this circular seam. So I'm going to take one of the fronts and one of the backs, and I'm going to lay them right sides together, and I am lining it up along this seam, and you can see the notch lines up here. The hem is even at the bottom. This sticks out a little bit, it's supposed to. The rest of it does not line up, and it should not. If it does, you've got the wrong pieces. So we've got one front and one back right sides together, and I'm going to pin at right angles to the edges of the fabric so they're easy to remove while I'm sewing. And then I'm going to do the same with the other two. So at the sewing machine, we're doing regular sewing. So stitch length is 2.5, and we're going to sew 1.5 centimeters from the edge. So ideally on garments, you sew bottom to top. That preserves the grain line on the garment. So I'm starting at the bottom and lining up with the 1.5 back stitch, and follow the curve. Ignore the notch, that's just for lining it up. You go straight past that, up to the top, and back stitch. Cut your threads. And do the same with the other one. Then you're going to serge this seam. So I am going to trim some of this off. It makes it easier to press this afterwards. So I'm going to cut off almost half of the seam, or the seam allowance. And these serged ends can be cut off. We're going to sew across them later, so they will be locked by being stitched across. Then we're going to press the seam. So again, press it as it was sewn. And then usually we press seams like this towards the back of the garment. Now this is not a completely flat seam. It comes around a curve. So I'm going to show you two ways to do it. So again, I'm holding and lifting a little bit and just pressing along the edge of the seam so that I don't press some funny wrinkles in on the other side. And then turn it over and press from the right side. And again, I'm manipulating the fabric so that I'm not getting some creases in there that I don't want. So there's that one pressed. Now again, the other way to do it is to use the ham. And we need to press it like we sewed it first. So just press it flat, set your stitching. And again, we're pressing toward the back, which is the side with the dart. And this curve, I'm going to have to kind of manipulate even on the ham. And be careful about not getting wrinkles. I think it'll work better when I press from the right side, but we need to do the wrong side first. And then flip it. Yeah, and even on the ham, I can't press the entire seam all at once. I have to manipulate it around the ham somewhat in order to be able to press it. So again, just be careful that you're not pressing in some wrinkles that you don't want in the finished garment. So there's our seam pressed towards the back. So when I was pressing, it erased the dot from the back piece, and I'm going to need that for my next step. So I'm just going to remark where that dot is, and I'm lining up from the top here because we sewed the seam, so it's not going to line up quite the same over there. And now I'm going to lay one of these right side up, and then I'm going to put the other one on top of it, right side down. And you can see now if I tried to, I could make these completely line up, but the only part I'm interested in is the curved seam here. This is called the crotch seam. So I'm going to pin this, and your seams should line up right here. Again, if you've cut it out correctly and sewn nice straight seams, it should line up perfectly. And I'm going to pin all the way around. And that's ready for sewing. So again, this is regular stitching. So 2.5, 2.6 stitch length, 1.5 centimeters from the edge. So I'm going to start on the front part and sew towards the dot on the back. So back stitching. Now again, this is quite a curve. If you have trouble sewing around curves, drop your needle and you can do little pivots so that you can sew smoothly around the curve. And at the crotch, there's a little bump there, but you should sew straight across that. Don't jog to match that bump. Treat it like a notch. And continuing into the back. And again, little pivots if you need to. And now I'm coming up to the dot, and that dot is where I'm actually going to stop. And I'm going to back stitch. Very important that you back stitch here. And cut your threads. And we're going to make a snip right to the dot, lined up with our stitching there. Back at the serger, we're going to serge this seam that we just sewed, but we're going to fold this top part out of the way so we don't do any serging there. Again, I'm going to cut off about half. Go slowly so that you can get around the curve. And you're sewing right off at the end there. Now this one here is not going to be sewn across later, so I am going to knot. You won't see this knot. You can weave it or glue it if you, well, I wouldn't glue it in case the glue shows on the right side on the fabric, but you could weave it if you prefer. So I'm knotting that one, and the other one can be cut off. We will be sewing across that later on. So at the iron, I'm not going to completely press this seam. I am going to press it flat the way it was sewn, but I'm not going to try and press it to one side because it is a curve. It's almost impossible to press that flat. When I sew this later, I will fold this to one side, but I do need to press on the back here. This little opening is going to leave some room for the bear to get these on and off. So what I'm going to do is just simply fold back that edge 1.5 centimeters, and I'm not measuring because I know what that is, but if you need to measure this, and press that, and then I'm going to do a little fold right there. So I've taken half that and folded it underneath, and I'm going to do the same on the other side. And it's just folded to meet the first crease that I made. So that's neatly folded, and now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to be stitching around that to finish off that edge. So I'm going to stitch on the right side, and I'm going to stitch about 4 millimeters from the edge. So I'm actually lining up the seam with, there's sort of an opening in the presser foot, and I'm lining up the edge of the fabric with the edge of that opening is what I'm doing. So back stitch, and so straight down, and when you get to the bottom of the opening, needle down and pivot, and go across the bottom, and then pivot and go up the other side the same distance from that edge, and back stitch. And cut your threads. And that's a nicely finished opening there. So right now these pants don't look much like a pair of pants, but when we're done the next step they will. So you're going to take this and manipulate it so that it is right sides together with the notches on each side here. This is the double notch lining up. And you're going to pin this edge together, and again, don't worry about any of the rest of it. It will not lay flat. We've got darts in there and shaping. We're just lining up this edge. And then you're going to do the same on the opposite side. So now this looks like an inside-out pair of pants. So at the machine, you're going to sew the seams that you just pinned. So again, regular stitching, 2.5, 2.6 for length, 1.5 centimeters from the edge. Back stitching. So right past the notch. And back stitching at the top. And again, I started at the bottom and sewed towards the top. And do the same on the opposite side. And there's our seams. And again, at the serger, we're going to cut off about half of the seam as we serge. And these serger threads can all be trimmed off because they're going to be sewed across later on. So it can be a little bit tricky pressing this. You are going to start by pressing it the way you sewed it on both sides. And we want to press it towards the back, but there's lots of fabric there and it will make wrinkles. So normally I would use a seam roll for this. But the bear, we'll see if I can get this in. It's a little small with the bear, but you know what? It's going to fit, so that's going to work. So again, towards the back, so where the dart is, and pull your fabric so that when you press this, you're going to have a nice flat edge there. I'm just holding it a little so that that will press flat. And then you take the pant leg off and do the other one. And if you don't have a seam roll, you could roll up a towel tightly and use a towel to do this, and I think it would help keep you from getting a bunch of wrinkles you don't want when you press this. And there's our pants inside out, and we are going to put them right side out for the next step. So now we're ready to attach the waistband to the pants. So we have our markings on here that are going to help us line this up. So I'm going to start at the back, and I'm going to line up this dot here, which is 1.5 centimeters away from the edge, and that's being lined up with the edge of the pant there, and pin that in place. Now as you pin around, I'm going to put a pin where the dart is to hold the dart towards the center back. And then at the side seam, this dot, if everything has been sewn accurately, should line up with the side seam, and mine's lining up nicely there. And same as you go around, I'm going to put one pin in the middle here before the center front. And then this line should line up at center front. And you can fold that seam either direction when you pin it. It just goes whichever way you want. And then again, I'm going to put a pin in the middle between the center front and the side seam. And then this dot should line up with the side seam here. Seam goes towards the back. And then as I come around on the back again, I'm going to put a pin where the dart is to make sure that that's folded the right way. And then this dot should line up with the edge of the back. And again, that's accurate cutting, accurate sewing, and everything fits together the way that it's meant to. I'm going to sew this from the inside so I don't accidentally sew parts together that I don't want sewn together. Notice as well that the band is right sides together with the bottom there. And this again is all normal stitching, so 2.5 stitch length and 1.5 centimeters from the edge of the fabric. Back stitch. And I'm just making sure that everything is lined up, that the seams are going the direction that I want them as I sew. And you do have to do frequent stops to reorganize your fabric so it's flat in front of the needle. And back stitch at the end. Cut your threads. And that's stitched all around. Now we're going to cut the pant side shorter than the waistband side. So this is called grading again, like you did on the shirt. So now you're going to press this, and again I'm going to press it as I sewed it. And this is in a circle, so you have to kind of work your way around it to do that. And then I want to press this up, and I want the seam on the inside to be pressed up towards the waistband. And at the end here where it's the longer extension is, you can press that as well. So I'm going to just do parts of it because again it's in a circle, a little bit harder to manipulate. Good pressing makes a big difference to how the finished garment will look when it's done. So now we're going to take the other side and fold that 1.5 centimeters. Now you can pin this if you prefer. I'm going to just measure and iron, but if there's a lot of people waiting for the iron, you should pin it first so that you're not too long at the iron. Now I've been sewing for a long time, and I can actually do a very accurate 1.5 centimeter or 5/8 of an inch fold without measuring. But if you cannot eyeball that accurately, you need to measure. So when you're done, that's what it should look like. This side pressed up towards the band, this side pressed 1.5 centimeters towards the band. Now we want to finish off the ends of the band here. So on the one side, you can see that this extends 1.5 centimeters from the edge. So on that side, I'm going to fold this right sides together. So I'm looking at the wrong side on both sides. I'm lining up the bottom edges here, and then I'm going to pin that. And on the opposite side, you have a longer extension there. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm folding it right sides together, lining up the bottom edges there where it's folded, and I'm going to pin that one. When I sew this, I'm going back to this one with the shorter extension. I want to sew this so that it lines up with the edge of the pant here. So this should be about a 1.5 centimeter seam. This is normal stitching, 2.5 stitch length. So we need to back stitch. And this isn't very wide, so you're basically going to be back stitching almost the whole thing by the time you're done, in order to get it back stitched on both sides of it, which is fine. So that one looks like that, and then you're going to trim this, so you're cutting everything off, and then make a little angle clip at the fold line, and then you're going to cut the inside layer, this layer here, shorter, grade it shorter than the other layer, and then this is going to be flipped like that. So this side is finished even with the edge of the pant. On the other side, this has a longer extension here because we need an overlap to be able to fasten this. Now this is a bit longer than it needs to be. So when I sew this one, I am going to actually sew it 2.5 centimeters from the edge instead of 1.5 because there's more there than we need. So I'm going to back stitch. And again, sewing straight across, back stitching on both sides. So the whole thing looks like it's back stitched when you're done. Trim your threads. And again, we're going to trim this. So I'm going to trim everything, cutting off about 1.5 centimeters. Do that little angle at the fold line. And then you're going to grade the inside layer, shorter than the outside layer. And again, we're going to flip that. And gently push out the corner. So this one is finished with a bit of an overhang there. So now we are going to finish off the inside of the band so we don't have all these rough edges inside here. So I'm going to start by pinning. So I'm folding the band so it just covers the stitching that I did to fasten the band to the pant. And I'm going to pin. So again, I'm just covering that stitching all the way around. So once you've pinned that, when we sew this, we're also going to attach the top and the straps to it. So we'll start with the top, and you want to first fold this in half so that you can find out exactly where the center is. And I'm just going to put a pin to mark the center there. And then this is going to go lined up with the center front. And we know where the center front is because we sewed a seam there on the pant. So I'm going to line this up on the inside with the seam, which is right here. And so I just line up that pin with that, and I'm lining up this with the bottom of the band. So this is going to get sewn in place when we sew the band on, or finish off the band. So there's going to be a lot of pins to deal with in this area that I'll have to be careful about when I'm sewing. So I'm doing a pin in the middle, and then I'm going to do another pin on the end here, like that, and then on the other side, same thing. So a pin in the center, and another pin on the end. And then the straps are going to go where the dart is. So I'm basically going to center the strap. Now I'm also going to angle them because I'm going to crisscross the straps in the back on the bear. The bear doesn't have very big shoulders, so they don't stay up very well. I mean, if you don't want it crisscrossed, do this straight up, but I'm going to do a crisscross. So again, I'm lining up the bottom of the strap with the bottom of the band, and I'm centering the strap so it's roughly in the center where that dart is. And then I'll do the same on the opposite side. So it looks like that when it's done, ready for sewing. So after I pinned this, I very carefully turned this inside out so I didn't poke myself, because I want to sew looking at the right side, but I don't want to accidentally sew the two sides together. So by turning it inside out, I can see the part and keep it out of the way. And I'm going to start on the end with the overhang on this one at the corner. I'm going to sew about 3 millimeters from the edge, so fairly close to the edge, and going to back stitch. And as I mentioned earlier, I have to really watch for my pins as I go. So I'm sewing along the bottom of the band right now, about 3 millimeters from the bottom. And when I get to this front part, I know I have pins underneath as well as on top. So I just am being aware of that. If you accidentally sew over a pin, sometimes you can get away with it. You just have to be careful, because if the needle hits it, it will break the needle, which is not the worst thing in the world. Needles break when we sew, but if we can avoid that, that's ideal, because then you have to stop and get a new needle and rethread and all of that. And I'm trying to keep all my pins from the other side out of the way as I'm sewing as well. So take your time on this. It is much better to go slowly and not rush and do a nice job than having to go back later and repair. And then I'm going to pivot on the corner here and sew up across the top, the edge of the band, and then turn and go down the other side. And I'll be able to go faster now because all my pins are out and everything has already been stitched in place on the first seam there that I sewed. And backstitch and cut your threads when you're done. And it's all sewn on. Do check on the inside and make sure that you've caught the band along the bottom here, and mine looks good. If you don't catch it, then we can fix that. So that is all sewn together and almost done.